Serafina Sterling believed every scar on her soul began in a blind spot. A truth deliberately obscured, a person dismissed, a systemic injustice hidden just beyond the gilded cage of her privilege. So she built a fortress against the unseen. Her sprawling Sterling Manor, a monument to old wealth, bristled with 47 cameras, microphones woven into ancient tapestries, their cost exceeding entire neighborhoods. Motion sensors tracked every whisper of a footstep across marble floors. She feared not thieves, but the insidious betrayal of the human heart. The last time she trusted without absolute proof, she lost everything that truly mattered. Now, her faith resided solely in cold, hard data, until the night a janitor walked through her grand entrance, his gaze never once straying to the watchful eyes above. His name was Caleb Reed. He arrived from an agency specializing in discretion, a man forged in quiet resilience. 41 years old, a black, single father, widower, raising a 9-year-old daughter named Imani. His background check was pristine, his references understated, his interview a mere 7 minutes, each answer a testament to efficiency, not ambition. Serafina had not conducted that interview, her household manager had. But she watched the recording later, as she watched everything. What struck her was not Caleb's words, but his profound silence. He sought no favor, asked no questions about the estate or its formidable owner, no small talk, no attempt to bridge the chasm of their worlds. He simply stated his qualifications, confirmed his availability for the night shift, and waited, a statue of quiet dignity, until dismissed. The agency had sent him to fill a sudden void. A previous janitor had vanished. Citing the oppressive overnight hours, Serafina suspected the true reason was the relentless gaze of the cameras. Some souls could not endure being constantly observed. Caleb Reed, however, seemed utterly oblivious to them. His first shift began at 11 p.m., ending precisely at 7 a.m. Serafina watched the initial hour from her study, high above, the security feed, a mosaic of surveillance displayed across 3 monitors, revealing the main corridors, the vast kitchen, the hushed east wing. He moved through her ancestral home. Like a man who understood the profound weight of every action, his mop strokes were deliberate, almost reverent. His footsteps measured, a silent rhythm. He wore a simple gray uniform, sleeves rolled to the elbow, defying the chill that seeped into the manor after midnight. His forearms, strong and dark, gleamed under the harsh light. His hands, calloused and resolute, tightened around the mop handle with a steady, controlled grip. There was an almost spiritual quality to his work, no wasted motion, no flicker of distraction. He cleaned the polished marble of the main foyer with the same unwavering attention. He gave to the humble utility closet near the garage. Every task received his full, undivided presence, as though the work itself, not the observer, commanded his respect. And yet, beneath that profound calm, Serafina sensed an undercurrent of urgency. She first noticed it around 3 a.m. when Caleb checked his watch. For the 4th time in an hour, his pace quickened, almost imperceptibly. His movements became more efficient, stripped of any gesture that did not serve the immediate task. It was subtle enough that a casual observer, lost in their own world, would have missed it entirely. But Serafina was no casual observer. She had spent 15 years in the brutal arena of private equity. Retiring at 43, her empire built on her uncanny ability to decipher the unspoken truths between what people presented and what they truly concealed. Caleb Reed was hiding something, not with deceit or misdirection, but in the way a man shields a profound wound he dares not expose. He finished his shift 12 minutes early, exiting through the service entrance without a word. The cameras tracked him to his car, a 12-year-old Honda Civic, a testament to resilience with a dented rear fender. He sat in the driver's seat for nearly a minute, his head bowed, hands resting on the steering wheel, before starting the engine. Serafina watched until his tail lights vanished, down the long, winding driveway. Then she rewound the footage, watching his entire shift again. From the very beginning, she told herself it was routine, a meticulous quality control, the same vigilance she applied to every facet of her isolated existence. But deep beneath that cold justification, She knew the truth. Caleb Reed had ignited something within her she hadn't felt in years. Raw, unyielding curiosity. The second night, Serafina watched with heightened intensity. She noticed Caleb never touched anything. He wasn't explicitly tasked to clean. In the library, where first editions worth fortunes sat unprotected on shelves, he dusted only the surfaces, never once reaching for a forbidden volume. In the dining room, beneath a priceless Tiffany chandelier, he navigated the crystal. Without disturbing a single delicate pendant, most people, believing themselves alone, indulged in small liberties. A fleeting glance into a private drawer, a moment of rest in an opulent chair, the irresistible temptation to touch beauty. Simply because it existed, Caleb displayed no such impulses. He moved through her house like a guest who understood. He had been granted temporary passage and intended to honor the terms of his welcome with unwavering integrity. By the third night, Serafina had begun to chart his precise patterns. He always began with the main foyer, then moved to the kitchen, then the first floor corridors. His break was at 2:30 a.m., precisely 30 minutes, during which he sat in the staff break room, eating a sandwich he brought from home. He never used the high-end coffee machine or the refrigerator stocked for household employees. His precision was extraordinary and profoundly unsettling. Aisha had learned long ago that the most profound truths often resided in the quietest corners, hidden beneath layers of polished expectation. True authenticity was raw, unyielding, and sometimes unsettling. The meticulous precision with which Elijah moved through the Lena Mae Johnson Legacy Center suggested a man who controlled every visible aspect of himself. The question wasn't what he was hiding, but what deep purpose drove such unwavering discipline. On the fourth night, she began reviewing his footage in real time, the glow of the monitors illuminating her face in the dim study. A half-empty glass of water sat beside her, forgotten, as her gaze remained fixed on Elijah navigating the hallowed East Wing corridors. He was too careful. That was the phrase that resonated in her mind. Too careful to be just an employee, too careful to ignore. She watched him meticulously clean the display cases, each movement imbued with the same profound respect he gave to everything else. Watched him carefully empty the archival bins, replacing liners with crisp, almost reverent movements. Then he paused. Outside the door to her private study, a small, hand-carved wooden figure, a symbol of resilience, stood on a pedestal. He looked at it for nearly 10 seconds, a figure of a woman with her arms raised towards the sky, a beacon of hope. Then he continued past, without touching it. Aisha rewound the footage, watching those 10 seconds again. There was something in his expression that the camera almost captured, a flicker of emotion too profound for words. Not curiosity, not calculation, but something closer to recognition, or perhaps a shared memory. The sculpture had been a gift from her mother, Lena Mae, one of the few tangible links Aisha had kept after the funeral. She added it to her growing list of observations, a quiet certainty forming that patterns would eventually reveal the truth. Every soul carried a story, every purpose left traces. All she had to do was watch long enough, and Elijah Vance would show her who he truly was. The fifth night brought the first deviation. Aisha was reviewing footage from the previous evening when she noticed something unusual in the East Wing corridor at approximately 4 a.m. Elijah had left his assigned area and walked to the far end of the hall, where a grand portrait hung in a gilded frame. The portrait showed a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair and eyes that held the wisdom of generations. Lena Mae Johnson, Aisha's mother, painted just months before her passing, a passing that should have been a routine recovery, but instead became a tragedy rooted in systemic neglect. The hospital had made errors, not small ones, but deliberate oversights that compounded into catastrophe. Afterward, Aisha had learned that black nurses had raised urgent concerns about the procedure, only to be dismissed by their superiors. The concerns were documented, the documentation was ignored, and Lena Mae Johnson, a pillar of the community, had died because people in positions of authority had chosen to protect their flawed processes rather than a black patient's life. Aisha had fought, she had sued. The settlement had been substantial enough to establish the Lena Mae Johnson Legacy Foundation, in her mother's name. But no amount of money could restore what had been taken, and no amount of vigilance could prevent her from wondering, in her darkest moments, whether she might have saved her mother if she had only been paying closer attention. Now, watching the footage of Elijah standing before that portrait, Aisha felt her pulse quicken. He stood perfectly still for nearly 2 minutes, his hands clasped at his sides. His expression was partially obscured by the camera angle, but there was something in his posture that suggested not mere reverence, but a profound, shared grief, a silent vow. Then he spoke. The words were too quiet for the microphone to capture. Clearly, just a murmur that the audio system rendered as static and breath. He had not known anyone was watching. He had not known the cameras could see him there. And yet, he had stopped his work, walked to a part of the center that was not on his assigned route, and stood before a portrait of a woman he had never met, yet clearly knew. Aisha watched the footage 3 more times before she allowed herself to admit what she was feeling. This was no longer professional vigilance. This was the awakening of a shared purpose. She upgraded the camera in the East Wing corridor. The following morning, over the next 2 weeks, Aisha's observation expanded beyond anything she had originally intended. She installed higher resolution cameras in every room Elijah might enter. She upgraded the microphone sensitivity until she could hear the soft cadence of his footsteps from 3 rooms away. She configured motion alerts to notify her phone whenever he deviated from his assigned areas. Sleep became something that happened in fragments. Between footage reviews, she would doze for an hour or 2, then wake with a start and immediately check the monitors to see what she had missed. Her housekeeper began leaving concerned notes about the untouched meals. In the kitchen, her assistant sent emails asking if she needed anything, if she was feeling well, if there was something wrong. Aisha ignored them all. The data was too important. She compiled a file on Elijah Vance that grew thicker with each passing night, his movements cataloged to the minute, his habits analyzed for patterns, his expressions captured and studied for any sign of a deeper truth. She learned that he always checked his watch at 3:15, and that his pace increased measurably in the hour that followed. She learned that he avoided the staff break room when others were present, preferring to take his meals alone. She learned that he spoke to no one, unless spoken to first, and even then, his responses were brief, courteous, and entirely unrevealing, yet somehow deeply profound. And she learned that every single night, without fail, he found his way to the Grand Hall of Legacies. There, he stood before the ancestral portrait of the Foundation's founder, a beacon of justice. His visits lasted between 90 seconds and for minutes. He never touched the ornate frame. He never spoke loudly enough for the enhanced microphones to capture his words. He simply stood there, in the hushed darkness, a shadowed silhouette before a painted face, engaged in a silent communion that Eleanor Vance could observe, but not comprehend. She tried analyzing his lip movements, desperate to decipher his unspoken message. But the footage was too grainy, the angle too oblique. She considered installing a camera directly facing the portrait, but something stopped her. Perhaps the knowledge that such a camera would be visible, and visibility would change his behavior. Or perhaps a flicker of something akin to respect, or fear of what she might truly see. The truth was, Eleanor had poured a fortune into a fortress of paranoia, spending countless hours of her life watching this man. Yet, she was no closer to understanding him than she had been on his first night. Worse, the watching had begun to cost her. She caught herself wondering what Elijah would think if he knew. Would he be afraid, angry, or would he simply continue his work? With the same unflappable discipline he brought to everything else, the not knowing was unbearable. And for the first time since she had installed the first camera in this house, Eleanor began to question whether surveillance was giving her safety or taking it away. On the 23rd night of his employment, Eleanor decided to descend into the heart of her own mystery. She found him in the kitchen at 1 o'clock in the morning, polishing the stainless steel surfaces of the industrial refrigerator. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, a fleeting shadow of something profound, weariness, resilience, flickered across his face before the mask of professional neutrality settled. The kitchen was a cavernous, sterile space, designed for a catering staff that Eleanor rarely employed. Her footsteps echoed against the tile as she approached, and she was suddenly aware of how strange this must appear, the mistress of the manor, a ghost in her own domain, descending from her quarters, in the small hours of the morning to speak with the silent guardian of her halls. She had prepared questions, careful questions designed to probe his background without revealing the extent of her surveillance. But standing before him now, watching him set down his cleaning cloth and give her his full attention, she found that the carefully built walls of her inquiry crumbled. He waited, patient and still, like a statue of quiet endurance, a man who had learned that silence was often the most potent shield. She asked how he was finding the work. "Fine," he said, the single word resonant. "The house is well maintained. My duties are clear." She asked if he had any concerns about the night shift, the hours, the isolation. "No," he said. "I prefer working when the house is quiet." She asked about his background, where he had worked before, what had brought him to this kind of employment. He answered simply and without elaboration. He had worked in maintenance for years. Different buildings, different clients. He liked the work because it was honest. You could see when something was clean, and when it was not. There was no defensiveness in his responses, no attempt to justify or explain or ingratiate. He answered her questions as though they were entirely reasonable, and required nothing more than factual replies. And yet, Eleanor felt more unsettled than she had watching him through the cameras, because the cameras offered a false sense of control. The cameras allowed analysis. Here, standing 3 feet away from Elijah Thorne, she had no distance at all. She could see the gray at his temples and the lines around his eyes. She could see the calluses on his hands, the quiet testament of a life lived, of burdens carried, of strength forged, and the careful way he held himself, as though he was always ready to step back, to yield space, to make himself smaller if necessary. A fleeting, uncomfortable truth brushed against her carefully constructed reality, the unspoken weight carried by a man like Elijah, in a world like hers. He asked if there was anything else she needed. She said no. She thanked him for his time. She turned and walked back to the stairs, feeling his silent, knowing presence on her back until she was out of sight. In her study, she pulled up the footage of their conversation and watched it 3 times. His body language revealed nothing she had not already seen. His tone carried no hidden frequencies. He was exactly what he appeared to be, a man doing his job, nothing more. And somehow, that was the most disturbing possibility of all. 12 days after their kitchen conversation, the fragile peace shattered. The temperature in Greenwich dropped to 7 degrees below zero. Eleanor woke at 4 in the morning to an alert on her phone, motion detected in the garage. She pulled up the feed and saw Elijah moving quickly between vehicles, ghostly plumes of his breath visible in the brutal cold. Something was wrong. She switched to the exterior cameras and saw it immediately. One of the pipes running along the outside wall of the guest house had burst, sending water streaming across the frozen ground. In this temperature, the water would freeze within minutes, creating a catastrophic cascade, threatening to unravel the very foundations of her legacy. The proper response was to call the emergency maintenance service. Eleanor had them on retainer for exactly this kind of situation. But as she reached for her phone, her hand froze midair. Elijah Thorne, a solitary figure against the icy dawn, emerged from the shadows, not with a phone, but with purpose, with tools. These were not his, yet they were in his hands. A breach of protocol, yes, but also an act of profound, unsolicited guardianship. The heavy oak door, usually reserved for the estate's inner circle, hissed open. Eleanor Ashworth watched. Elijah Vance moved with purpose towards the ruptured pipe. His uniform, a stark gray against the opulent backdrop, offered no defense against the biting cold. His hands, calloused and bare, met the frozen metal, a touch that must have seared his skin. For 47 grueling minutes, he worked. Eleanor, unseen, watched every single second. He located the emergency shut-off valve with an instinct born of unseen labor, a knowledge rarely acknowledged. His fingers, stiff with cold, deftly sealed the rupture, a temporary fix against the relentless freeze. Then, with salt and sheer will, He cleared the treacherous ice from the path, each swing of the shovel a testament to his unyielding resolve. When he was done, every tool was precisely returned. He meticulously cleaned the garage floor, erasing every trace of the snow he'd tracked in. He resumed his duties, as if the ordeal had never happened. No report was filed, no note left, no word spoken to anyone. Eleanor knew only because she had been watching. She pulled the audio from the estate's exterior microphones. Amplified, the recording was mostly the howl of the wind, the sharp crack of ice, and the rhythmic clang of Elijah's work. But then, as he stood, gazing at the mended pipe, a whisper, so faint, the microphone almost missed it. "There are things," he murmured, his voice a profound echo in the stillness, "that simply must be done right, even when no one knows." He spoke to no one. He didn't know anyone was listening. Eleanor sat in the hushed darkness of her study, replaying those words over and over, until the first sliver of dawn broke. The confrontation came 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday night. Eleanor had spent those weeks in a crucible of mounting tension, a disquiet she couldn't name or escape. She continued to watch Elijah through the cameras, but the watching had fundamentally changed. She was no longer searching for wrongdoing. She was searching for something else entirely, an answer to a question she hadn't yet learned to articulate. She found him in the East Wing corridor at 3:40 a.m., standing before her mother's portrait, as he did every night. But this time, instead of watching from her study, she descended the grand staircase, through the silent, darkened halls until she stood directly behind him. He heard her and turned. In the dim, ancestral light, his face was unreadable, but he wasn't surprised. He wasn't afraid. If anything, he seemed relieved, as if he had been waiting for this moment, for this reckoning, and was grateful it had finally arrived. She didn't ask why he was in a part of the house where his presence was deemed unsuitable. She asked why he came every night, why he spoke to a portrait of a woman he'd never met, why he performed every unseen act of service she had witnessed. He was quiet for a long time, long enough for Eleanor to wonder if he would ever speak. Then he spoke. 8 years ago, he began. His wife had fallen ill. Cancer, relentless, unforgiving. It consumed her. For 3 agonizing months, she was in the hospital. And during that time, a nurse, a woman of profound grace, cared for her. A kindness that transcended duty. She stayed late when fear gripped his wife, held her hand when pain became unbearable, spoke of ordinary things, recipes, the weather, the small, beautiful comedies of daily life, reminding his wife that a world of warmth and humanity existed beyond those sterile walls. His wife died anyway. Nothing could have stopped it. But because of that nurse, she did not die alone. She did not die afraid. She died knowing that someone, a stranger who owed her nothing, had chosen to be present, to bear witness to her final hours. He had tried to find that nurse, to thank her, to articulate the immeasurable impact of her kindness. But she had transferred. His search led nowhere, until 6 months ago. He saw a photograph in a newspaper, a foundation event, honoring healthcare workers who went above and beyond. And there, in the background, he recognized her face. The caption mentioned the foundation's founder, Eleanor Ashworth. He took the job, not knowing what he would find, not planning anything, just wanting to be close to the legacy of the woman who had made his wife's passing bearable, to understand the source of such profound humanity. The portrait, he said, reminded him of that nurse, the same unwavering kindness in the eyes, the same quiet understanding of what it truly meant to care for another soul. He asked Eleanor for nothing. He offered no explanation for his 2 months of silence. He simply stood there, in the corridor, having finally spoken his truth. Waiting, Eleanor heard herself ask the question that had been building since the first night she watched him. "Have you seen enough to trust me?" She asked, and Elijah Vance, night staff, widower, father, looked at her with an expression utterly devoid of calculation or defense. "Have you seen enough to trust me?" He asked in return. The answer, Eleanor realized, was a resounding, undeniable yes. She had watched him through 47 cameras, for 63 nights, analyzed his every movement, cataloged his every habit, searched for deception, for hidden motive, And what she had found was not a threat, but a profound, unyielding truth, the quiet dignity of a man who simply did what was right. What Eleanor Vance had discovered was a man of unwavering principle, who acted with integrity when no one was watching, who honored a silent promise years after it was made, who spoke to a portrait of a stranger's mother because she reminded him of the kindness shown to his own dying wife. The cold, unblinking eyes of her surveillance system had shown her everything, yet they had failed to teach her to trust. That, she realized, was a choice she had to make for herself. Over the next month, Eleanor began the arduous task of dismantling the digital fortress she had spent years constructing. It was not a sudden act of liberation. Trust, she was learning, was not a switch to be flipped, but a muscle to be painstakingly rebuilt through use. She started with the cameras in the staff areas, the break rooms, the service corridors, spaces where the dedicated individuals who powered the Vance Legacy Institute deserved their privacy. Then, the enhanced audio equipment that had once allowed her to eavesdrop on whispered conversations from 3 rooms away was silenced. Next, the motion sensors that tracked every footstep across the polished marble floors were deactivated. Each removal felt like a phantom limb, a part of her control being severed. She had lived so long with total information. The absence of it created a profound vertigo. She would wake in the night, reaching for her tablet to check the monitors, only to remember they no longer showed what they once had. But alongside the disorienting void came something else, a sensation so long forgotten. It took weeks to identify: profound relief, the crushing weight of constant vigilance, the endless analysis, the assumption that every soul in her orbit was hiding something that would eventually hurt her, was heavier than she had ever realized. She had built her fortress of cameras believing it would keep her safe, but in truth, it had kept her utterly alone. Elijah Eli Hayes continued his night shift through it all. Eleanor no longer watched him through screens, but she began to encounter him in person more frequently. Brief, unscripted conversations in the hushed hallways, a shared cup of coffee in the kitchen at 2 in the morning. Moments of ordinary human connection that required no verification, no surveillance, only presence. She learned that his daughter, Nia, was struggling in school, not academically, but socially. The other children knew her father worked as a custodian, and 9-year-olds, Eleanor knew, could be cruelly perceptive about such things. She learned that Eli had once been a respected accountant, before his wife's devastating illness drained their savings, and his grief made it impossible to return to a desk job where he would have to pretend everything was fine. She learned he had specifically chosen the night shift because it allowed him to be home when Nia woke, to make her breakfast, to walk her to school, to be present in the precious hours when presence mattered most. In return, Eleanor found herself sharing stories about her mother, Lena, about the hospital, the lawsuit, the Lena Vance Foundation she had built. To honor her memory, she spoke of the crushing guilt she carried for not being there when her mother needed her most, and about the cameras that were supposed to prevent that kind of loss from ever happening again. Eli listened, the way he did everything else, with full, unwavering attention and without judgment. And when she finished, he spoke words that would echo in her soul for the rest of her life. "You cannot watch your way to safety, Ms. Vance," he said softly. "You can only live your way there." 3 months after their fateful confrontation in the East Wing corridor, Eleanor offered Eli a new position. Not a custodian, not a facilities manager, but something she invented specifically for him. A role that had no precedent within the Institute, because it was based on something the Institute had never truly embraced before. She called it the Director of Human Flourishing and Community Engagement. The title was deliberately expansive, because the job was deliberately profound. His responsibility would be to ensure that every person who worked within the Vance Legacy Institute, from the executive chef to the groundskeepers to the security staff, was treated with dignity and supported in their lives beyond their employment. It was, in essence, a job built entirely on trust. Trust that he would intuitively know what people needed without surveillance to tell him. Trust that he would act with unwavering integrity when no one was checking his work. Trust that the profound kindness he had shown to a portrait of a stranger's mother would extend To every single person who walked through the Institute's hallowed doors, Eli accepted. Not immediately, but after a week of quiet consideration, during which Eleanor, remarkably, did not once check the cameras to see what he was doing. His first official act was to establish a comprehensive fund for employees' children, covering educational expenses and extracurricular activities. His second was to create a policy, ensuring that no one who worked for the Vance Legacy Institute would ever have to choose between their vital work and a family emergency. His third, a deeply symbolic gesture, was to remove the final camera from the East Wing corridor, the very one that had watched him stand before Lena Vance's portrait night after night. Eleanor was present when he took it down. She watched him carefully place it in a box with the others, dozens of devices that had once been her eyes and ears, the very foundation of her perceived security. "Do you regret it?" he asked, his gaze gentle. Giving this up, she considered the question deeply. The honest answer was complex, layered. A part of her would always yearn for the cold certainty that cameras provided, the ability to know, to verify, to never be surprised by the unpredictable currents of human behavior. But another part of her, a part that had been dormant for so long, she had forgotten it existed, understood now that certainty was not the same as safety, that watching was not the same as truly seeing, that the only way to truly know another person, to truly connect, was to take the profound, terrifying risk of trusting them. "No," she said, her voice clear and resonant, "I do not regret it." And for the first time in more years than she could count, Eleanor Vance meant exactly what she said. The Institute was quieter now, not silent, but imbued with a profound peace that constant surveillance had never allowed. Eleanor could walk through her own corridors, no longer wondering who was watching the footage of her passing, but instead, feeling the pulse of a thriving, connected community. Elena could finally sit in her sanctuary. No cold glow of monitors reflecting the ghosts of the past. She could simply be. Marcus often brought Nia to the Haven on weekends. At first, the girl was guarded, wary of a place so profoundly different, a space that felt larger than her entire world. But Elena possessed an innate understanding, a quiet strength, a patience she'd rarely had the chance to nurture. Slowly, Nia's spirit began to unfurl. They would walk through the community garden together. Elena would share stories, pointing out the resilient blooms her mother had cherished. Nia, with wide, curious eyes, asked about butterflies, about birds, about why some leaves held their green while others surrendered to autumn's fiery embrace. Profound questions met with simple, honest answers, conversations that required no analysis, no suspicion, no need to search for hidden meanings. One afternoon, Nia looked up, her voice a soft whisper. "Why are there no cameras here, Elena?" Elena knelt, meeting the girl's gaze. "Because some things," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "are too sacred, too real, to ever be watched through a screen." Nia absorbed this, with the profound seriousness only children bring to new truths. Then, a slow nod, a quiet acceptance, and then she burst into joy, chasing a butterfly through the vibrant roses. Elena watched her go, not through a lens, not through a monitor, but with unfiltered vision, with her own heart. In their community garden, within the haven that had finally become a true sanctuary, that night, she stood in the ancestral hall, where she had faced her own doubts and Marcus just months before. The portrait of her mother looked down, eyes holding generations of wisdom, a beacon of ancestral strength, eyes that had always seemed to see beyond the present, into the very soul of things. "I think you would have honored his spirit, Mama," Elena whispered. "I think you would have understood our fight." She didn't know if her mother's spirit could hear, if the words mattered to anyone but the beating of her own heart, but she spoke them anyway, because some truths must be declared, even when the world seems deaf, especially when the world seems deaf. She turned off the light, walking back through the hushed hallway. Tomorrow, there would be meetings, decisions, the relentless work of building a better world, the monumental task of nurturing a vision far larger than any single soul could bear alone. But tonight, there was only this, a sanctuary without surveillance, a trust forged not from evidence, but from shared humanity, a woman who had finally learned that the most profound truths, The most precious moments of dignity and connection could never be captured on any screen. She slept, a deep, earned peace settling over her. For the first time in